Hey everyone, welcome back to the 443 Security Simplified. I'm your host, Mark the Liberty, and joining me today is
Corey Ironlegs Knockreiner.
Okay. On this week's episode, we will be discussing a different alloy body part. I don't know.
Glasswings and Mythos and AI news.
Anthropic's Project Glasswing.
And decided to change it to Iron Legs.
There we go. Now, we will discuss Project Glasswing and what it means for cybersecurity and the software ecosystem. After that, we'll cover Lumen's Black Lotus Labs blog post on FrostArmada, a new campaign targeting, believe it or not, edge networking equipment yet again. And then we will end with Google's latest announcement for the updated Chrome 146 with a brand new way to protect against session hijacking attacks.
Yeah. It'd be harder to do it. Wait, attacker in the middle might still work, but not to get your session.
Or will it? With that, let's go ahead and generate our way in, Mythos Edition. So, I guess, Corey, to start, what would you say if I told you that cybersecurity might be reaching a fundamental, turning point or really scary situation if a bunch of marketing hype turns out to be true?
Didn't I already say that this year would be the last normal year? I guess I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah. And it feels like we have reached that potential fork in the road that is, if we are to believe everything coming out of Anthropic's mouths. And I don't know, Anthropic does have a history of being, I wouldn't say the boy who cried wolf, but at least like the even fearmonger doesn't seem nice, but like big claims about how scary AI can be. And, occasionally they turn out to be correct. But this last week, they announced the Claude Mythos preview, which is the latest frontier model, which they are not going to be releasing for general use. And alongside that, announced what they're calling Project Glasswing, which is an initiative to give some of the biggest names in tech early access to this frontier model for cyber defense. Basically, in their announcement, they claim that Claude Mythos is exceptionally good at finding and exploiting vulnerabilities, and that it's already found thousands of high severity vulnerabilities in every single major operating system and web browser. Basically, they're saying this is too big, too good, too scary to release to the public. So instead, they're going to only release it to critical infrastructure vendors and major technology companies to use defensively to find and fix vulnerabilities before it makes its way publicly in some potentially limited capacity. During Project Glasswing, Anthropic says they're going to work directly with 40 major technology companies to operationalize Claude Mythos for defensive security, with the goal of sharing what they learn with other companies. Those 40 include the likes of like Microsoft, Google, like actual competitors of Anthropic, notably not OpenAI or X or whatever the heck owns XAI these days. And they're also going to be giving $100 million in free use credits for many of these organizations, and like another, I think it was like 10 million for open source projects to operationalize Claude Mythos
million,
preview.
I think, for the direct donations.
4 million. But either way, so alongside this big, like, scary announcement of we've just broken cybersecurity fundamentally, their Frontier Red Team published a technical write-up that we'll talk about in a bit. Shortly afterwards, Scott Bennett, or Besnet, the Treasury Secretary for the U.S., and Jerome Powell, the head of the Federal Reserve, held an urgent meeting with the CEOs of many banks that happen to be in town for Washington, D.C. to like warn them about the risks posed by Claude Mythos. Like, seems like a lot of people are taking this very seriously, and more seriously than like other marketing material that has come out of any AI lab historically. The Frontier Red Team's blog post was interesting. They said they couldn't talk about like most or almost all of the vulnerabilities they found because Many of them are not yet patched, but they gave examples like a 27-year-old denial of service vulnerability in OpenBSD, which is a heavily hardened Unix operating system, a 16-year-old vulnerability in the popular video encoding library FFmpeg that over 5 million scanner runs had never found, and then a chained privilege escalation vulnerability in the Linux kernel that Claude Mythos was able to find and exploit. They gave a few benchmarks as well. They pointed to, I think it's CyberGym, benchmark on vulnerability reproduction, saying that they were able to reproduce 83% of Mythos's vulnerabilities versus only 66% of Claude Opus 4.6's vulnerabilities. But either way, like Corey, this seems like it could potentially be a very huge deal if it turns out to be correct. And I feel like it's not super surprising. The only surprise I have is that this just came out like last week, pretty quickly, versus like I don't know, versus sometime next year or the year after. Like it feels came early potentially.
Sudden. Yeah.
But it's not like I was expecting this type of thing. Like AI
We've
has
been
been getting
talking
better
about
and
this
better.
forever. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we've talked about 0 day is going to go up because of this. We talk about the old DEF CON, the Grand Cyber Challenge, where we've already seen AI find and patch 0 day basically at machine speed. And we've mentioned many times that not only is AI getting better, it's getting better at an accelerated pace we've never seen before. So at the end of the day, this isn't completely surprising. One of the things I've seen blowing up about this is jokes about, is Mythos really that much better a model, or is it basically just 4.6 of the old model, but with better GPUs and more available RAM so that they have a larger context window? And that may seem like a small detail, but I think we've even internally been playing with AI to help us verify and find potential security issues in coding in general. And I think you've pointed out to me in the past, when there's big amounts of source code, when you have a pretty big project, let's say Windows, a huge freaking project, and when you're looking for vulnerabilities, say in a specific function that could be all over the code in lots of different places, how much that the AI can keep in its context window at once significantly changes how good it is at maybe finding all the interactions that could, long story short, result in discovering vulnerabilities that you may not have been able to. So I'm curious whether Mythos is just that much better at coding and spotting vulnerabilities, or is this more memory, bigger context windows? And one day when AI can see all of source at once, we already know it's great at analyzing things technically. Maybe it's going to just right away find all these complex 0 day that are buried everywhere. So I think the only surprising thing is that, Anthropic thinks it's a big enough deal that they pre-set up a group of organizations to say they're not going to release a model until they figure out the implications.
I think that's a good approach. Well, I mean, it's clearly a good approach by them if this turns out to be correct. Like if their fear turns out to be like accurate to reality, I'm glad that they're erring on the side of caution then and saying, okay, we're going to give defenders a head start this time.
Others
because that hasn't
to be regulating it. So it's nice that they're thinking about it and kind of self-regulating, to your point.
And that hasn't historically been the case with these models. Like they generally become public, like they release them for everyone to use soon after they certify them or whatever within their own testing labs. And anyone can use them, good or bad. And yeah, they've got guardrails, but it's still relatively trivial to get around guardrails and jailbreak an AI model to do whatever you want. One thing that stood out to me, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, maybe it's what stood out to you too, but the banking connection is interesting to me too, only because, like you were pointing out, that OpenBSD, I mean, BSD is one of the strongest operating systems, at least reputationally, as far as having people that care about secure operating systems. To find a 27-year-old vulnerability is a big deal. But then you have the banking industry, which pretty much lives, I'm overstating, I'm sure they use modern technology too, but they live on legacy code and technology. Like I'm sure they're the organizations that still have I don't know, VMS VAX machines and might have Windows CE hiding in ATMs. So if you're finding 27-year-old vulnerabilities in well-established code that's been around and is still updated today, imagine what you can find in all that legacy stuff. So the banking, like you say, if it's true, if it really is that good at becoming a zero-day researcher, it could definitely have industry-wide implications, and I could see why they're concerned with banking.
Another thing that stood out to me was when they talked about those benchmarks and like what makes Claude Mythos so good. They also like pointed out that Claude Opus 4.6, their currently most powerful model that us normal humans can use, only 66.6% of vulnerabilities that it found were actually reproducible, meaning only like 2/3 of reports were actually valid. And that's actually in line with a trend that I've been seeing, like with vulnerability reports submitted to WatchGuard, for example. We get so much AI generated garbage these days that like it thinks it found something, but it turns out it's hallucinating, and someone submits a bug bounty report for it. Like one of my worries is as AI becomes more used, we are going to see more and more like just garbage coming into the system that we'll have to find a way to sift through. And we've already seen the fallout for that too. Like HackerOne just announced they're pausing their internet bug bounty program, which was like a HackerOne funded program to offer bug bounties on open source software that otherwise they don't have finances to actually pay out bounties because of all the AI hallucination reports that they've been getting in. I think it was Node.js, like one of, if not the most popular, like JavaScript frameworks out there, paused their bug bounty program because of AI-based submissions. So even as we're moving towards this future where AI becomes more powerful and can find more legitimate stuff, it also becomes more widely used and finds a lot of garbage
AI
because,
slop.
yeah,
People think AI slop as in silly videos and audio, but in this case, a false positive when you're giving a coding or security team a supposed new vulnerability. If you get overwhelmed with a bunch of false positives, that's a type of AI slop that can make it harder for you to get to the real work of the actual true positives.
And so I think another piece of this, like this fork in the road that we're at right now with this potential or this upcoming release of Claude Mythos, at least in a limited capacity, is we're also reaching a turning point where like we can't have humans scale to the right level to like even triage a lot of these findings that are coming in. So we have to very quickly make the step from automated vulnerability discovery and verification to automated patching and like development as quickly as possible to be able to bridge that gap. Otherwise, we're just going to have a hell of a lot of unpatched 0 days being reported that are valid reports that humans can't keep up with potentially.
But man, we better solve that false positive or slop problem, because can you imagine if we do have to move, if there are enough legitimate new vulnerabilities being found where you do have to auto patch with AI too, how would it react? Like it's it's this recursive bad loop of false positive submitted, code change based on false positive that likely makes all kinds of crazy things happen.
Yeah.
That would be a bad feedback loop. Hopefully we'll solve the false positives before we adopt automated patches.
So like I'm of the belief that we should take this announcement like with a small grain of salt because it is clearly a look how big and scary and powerful of a tool we made kind of announcement, but also take it seriously because it is, even if it is just a slightly better iteration of what we already have right now, it'll still be better than most humans at finding and exploiting vulnerabilities. And this is where we're at right now in April of 2026. Like September of this year, a few more months, maybe we have something even more powerful and even more scary. Like,
yeah, I kind of lean on, I hear your balanced approach and I think it's right. But I personally think that Anthropic, I guess some people like, I think they might overstate a little, but it's never a lie. They are in the business and are profit motivated to make good AI tools and to have good AI tools. So they don't want to be the boy who cried wolf and people stop using their new model when they do release Mythos. So I think while I do think they're one of the few AI companies out there that might be trying to add security and add a little warning to it too. And that's why I do think sometimes they will overstate things. I have a feeling, even if it's a tad overstated now, we're on the cusp of the, like, it's stuff we've been predicting anyways. Like, it's almost like this is what you and I have been saying for the last 3 years would eventually happen, and now we're like, it sounds too crazy to be true, but I think it's happening, and I think it happening faster than we expect is something we ought to change our expectations for, because everything about AI is going to happen faster than we expect, in my humble opinion.
Yep. And now we have already started getting questions about this from like our customers too. On like, what does this mean? And like, what should we do? And like, my guidance is still the same. Like, be prepared to have a good, or you should already have a good patch management process, but be prepared to respond to potential updates quicker and more frequently than you have been right now. Because as these tools get more powerful, find more things, it's not just us defenders finding and fixing them, it is cyber criminals
Yes.
finding and exploiting them. And that
and
time
and
from
customers and users updating their stuff, especially when it comes to hardware and firmware products. Like, I think we're moving to an age where people might start to accept over the air forced updates. Like, I just want to bang this drum for a second, Mark, because we have a hardware based firewall product, as well as a bunch of software based firewalls and products. But for the hardware based one, even when we have a vulnerability we really want to bang the drum about and let the whole world know, sometimes the adoption, like how quickly we see people that we, the numbers we can look at update, is still low. Even for one of our biggest things, I think we have seen it get to 80%, which is great, but that's 20% of people still not updating something that we've kind of been yelling about. So what does that make you think about the normal security fixes that we don't yell about? So to your point, is if we start to see these quickly, even if everyone in the industry can accelerate their patching and if there's a person in the middle for a device, like a network device, like the reason over the air forced updates are an issue for a hardware network provider is if it's a gateway device, we don't want to disrupt your network if there's a reboot needed. But this is something we need to figure out. And like people that run these devices, we're trying to do our best to make it so you don't have to do anything and we can try to secure you. But there are cases where you have to do something, and you're part of this loop of correcting the issues before the hackers leverage it. So, besides just us doing a good job of it and our managed service providers and other vendors doing a good job, it's something all IT folks need to think about, period.
yeah, 100%. So just be prepared for rapid security updates, and definitely have those maintenance windows pre-planned as advanced as you can. I am looking forward to getting my hands on Claude Mythos, that is for sure. This seems insanely interesting, and I'm looking forward to seeing if it really does live up to the hype.
On the
So,
flip side, it should probably be good at coding too. So we should see a lot of cool, innovative new software coming out quickly as well.
and even more AI slop. But let's move on to the next topic. So, Lumen's Black Lotus Labs published a pretty interesting blog post last week describing what they're calling FrostArmada, which is a campaign that they've attributed to Forest Blizzard, which is the name given to Russian GRU Unit 26165, so a Russian nation state backed hacking organization, which they claims have affected 40,000 or up to 40,000 consumer routers. Basically, this campaign started around May 2025 with limited targeting and more widespread exploitation starting in August of last year, peaking in around December, and continuing well through the current time right now. During this campaign, the Russian GRU hacking team will exploit exposed web interfaces, primarily for TP-Link and MikroTik routers, change the DNS settings, and then propagate them using DHCP to devices behind the router. And then when they receive a DNS request for a targeted domain, instead of giving the legitimate IP address to the client, they will give the IP address of a server under the attacker's control. So the client will connect to the attacker's web server instead of the legitimate website. Now, the Russian GRU has not figured out how to forge certificate private keys yet. And so it does display a certificate warning when the victim goes to one of these websites. But if they click through that, then they automatically steal OAuth session tokens and can use that to take over and compromise accounts. Some of the global victims that Lumen has identified include ministries of foreign affairs and national law enforcement for some North African, Central American, and Southeast Asian countries, as well as some other private organizations across Europe and even North America. So this one,
Pausing for a second, I was a little interesting too that how they set up the infrastructure that they came out like we're familiar with this because of VPN filtering, maybe other botnet attacks from Russia. They came
maybe
out
other
of
botnet attacks from Russia that will remain unnamed on this podcast.
Longtime listeners know what we're saying. They come out at Tor exit relay, but before they hit the target router, there were some Soho proxy hops, which is kind of familiar too. I'm curious of the Soho proxy hops. My understanding is that they're still TP-Link and MikroTik, but they were targeting, as you say, law enforcement and nation state, etc., as far as the targeted routers. But I wonder if any of these Soho ones those ones seem more like kind of an additional proxy protection that could just be consumer. Like, did they describe, besides being similar devices, do they describe the victimology of the proxy hop versus the
They didn't.
victims?
So I interpreted it as it could either be another like proxy layer of the same botnet, like we've seen them do in the past, or like we've talked previously in recent months about like quote unquote legitimate proxying applications that people can set up, think like web browser plugins, VPNs, whatever, or just other botnets that have exploited routers and offer those as a proxy service that they could be relaying through those too.
But it's definitely smart, like this multiple layers, like they're already hiding their self behind Tor, behind, another router. So routers, as we've predicted and seen, we only predicted it because we watched the trend happen, are definitely a really good target for these threat actors.
And it makes sense to go after like consumer grade routers like this, where someone might enable the web interface and not realize they exposed it on the internet. Some of them might just be enabled by default on the internet and almost certainly not regularly patched with any meaningful frequency, which makes them perfect targets for this if they're able to find a vulnerability, or in this case, it looks like just brute force their way in with valid credentials as people either reuse default passwords or just set crappy passwords for their home router. It is yet another update on the trend of attacks against edge networking equipment, but this one very focused on consumer grade routers in this case, but still to try and like steal information. Like they're going after credentials, in this case, OAuth tokens from victims behind these routers. And based off like the telemetry they get from compromised devices, like IP addresses, they're able to target potentially, like based off the description for some of the victims, like potentially very valuable targets for a nation state threat actor to go after.
If you think about it, especially with work at home changing across the industry, including government and law enforcement, is like all of these people go home but probably connect to work remotely. So it makes sense that even consumer routers can be a way into pretty sensitive information.
Yep. So if you do have a MikroTik or a TP-Link router, now is probably the time to update it and make sure it's not exposed to the internet.
Let's just say all routers. If you have any consumer router, update its firmware. Like we saw in the story, they're leveraging patched vulnerabilities for these. So whether it's a low-end consumer router or a high-end consumer router, update it as soon as there's an update. It kind of adds to what we said before about making sure to update hardware quickly.
Yeah, and pretty soon after this came out, just a couple of days ago, the NSA, the National Security Agency, put out a like little bulletin for all U.S. citizens telling you go reboot your router, basically, because most of these types of attacks, they are ephemeral. They live just in memory. If you reboot the
Yeah,
device, it'll
living off the
restore a
land.
known good configuration.
Mirai botnet was like that, right? A reboot
Yep.
would wipe it unless they, but usually they could come in through some other means if you hadn't patched. But at least
But
it
it
would
is,
temporarily wipe it.
yep. It is funny seeing the NSA put out a 9-page white paper telling everyone go reboot your routers, especially if you're seeing weird internet activity like unexpected certificate errors. Moving on to the last one. So we've talked about a lot about credentialed attacks and authentication based attacks, and session hijacking is kind of the next frontier of that style of attack, where cyber criminals are even paying insiders in a company to give them like a browser export that includes session tokens that they can then use to go compromise the organization. It's one of like shiny hunters' favorite ways of getting into companies these days. Well, Google announced last week that the latest update for Chrome 146, includes a rollout of a new security feature that's designed to not entirely prevent, but at least substantially mitigate this style of attack. It's called Device Bound Session Credentials, or DBSC, which uses the computer's Trusted Platform Module, or TPM chip, to generate and securely
Or
save a.
security enclave if you're Mac, Mark. You
It's a
should use both
TPM.
terms.
It's whatever. To securely save a key pair per session so that Chrome can prove the identity of the hardware when it's asking for a session renewal. It's like real quick, like how session management generally works for a website. When you log into, let's say, your Facebook account, you're given what's called an access token, which is what your web browser sends with every single request it sends to that server. That's how Facebook validates that you are who you say you are with every request. And you're also given a longer living refresh token that you can use to get a new access token sometime in the future. Usually that access token is pretty short lived, like minutes, potentially up to hours for older websites. The refresh token could live to be quite a bit longer, like days, months, even years in some cases, depending on how the site is made. The risk comes from if an attacker is able to steal that refresh token without any other protections, they could then from their machine go use it to request a new access token, and then use that access token to basically take over or hijack your session. So this new feature binds that refresh token to your computer's hardware itself. By using the TPM built into it, there is no way, barring some insane critical vulnerability, for an attacker to get that private key out of the TPM, meaning the only way they can use that session token is directly on your computer. If they steal it and try and refresh it somewhere else, they won't have that private key to prove that they are who they say they are, and they won't be able to refresh the session. Now, this doesn't protect against everything, because that access token, they could still use that and continue using it to access a website, which means that we need some combination of also like shorter lived access tokens in order to make this work. It is not technically feasible to like refresh a token with every single request. You will blow up the TPM on your computer, so to speak. In fact, Google even mentioned in their little write-up there, like one of the caveats for this is TPMs are rate limited. And so if you're refreshing a lot very frequently in a ton of tabs, you might run into some rate limiting on it. But this is a meaningful improvement to what we had before, which was effectively no protection unless this site was doing like its own roll your own like IP address pinning or something for session information. So I think that like this is a good change. Now I saw like in news posts on this, they mentioned that like others like Okta are also investigating the technology. I would like to see this become widespread.
Industry standard, yeah.
Yeah, to help mitigate against this type of attack.
Are you going to leave Firefox until they get it?
I think Firefox is one of the ones also working on it as well too, even if it hasn't been officially released. But no, I will never leave Firefox. You can pry it out of my cold dead hands. Now, Google did note like another caveat. They said if malware is present on the device during session registration, it may be able to extract the private key. Basically, before it gets saved into that enclave, they could get a copy of it. That could enable session hijacking similar to other styles of cookie theft. But attacks involving malware during registration or TPM driver modifications are significantly more complex and significantly more easier to detect, way more than like the standard attacks we're seeing that just it's trivial to steal someone's session cookie and potentially use it. So I think it is a meaningful improvement, even if it doesn't like 100% mitigate the entire risk from this. It's
Yeah,
better than what we had, and incremental
absolutely.
improvements in cybersecurity are great.
No, I agree. This is a good thing. Hey, look at that,
Now,
man. We ended on good news for once.
I'm not done.
Wait,
I've got one more
darn it.
forward-thinking thought for you, Corey, and this is like a good thought. So it got me thinking, like, so we're using now a TPM to manage refresh tokens. What if we also start using the TPM for like other sorts of user activity? Like people may not know your computer already uses the TPM for like secure boot to validate that like the firmware that's being loaded and then the operating system being loaded is all what it's supposed to be. But what if we use it for more of these like web activities too? Like
Absolutely.
before I can go update my password, it'll go query the TPM and validate I'm on the normal hardware that I normally am. And if I'm not, then trigger another like MFA push or something. Like I could see it opening up more opportunities for additional verification for like hardware bound to a not user identity beyond what we have right now.
We do something more with important kernel drive, like already kernel driving, but that's usually based on operating system vendor like Microsoft's private key. But what if we have, some sort of industry wide, here are the big players for drivers that, can store keys in a TPM to make sure people can't start replacing drivers, whether you're operating. There are tons of potential, Mark. I think
Yep.
it's a very cool idea. On the flip side, that's just like anything digital key or digital certificate, then you have to deal with managing public private key infrastructure, and then it becomes a supply chain risk instead of a technical risk, right? Like, with the OS driver signing that already exists with Windows using vendor private keys, bad guys have figured out how to steal someone else's signing key. So you have to worry about the supply chain for providing all of
Yep.
this to the TPM. But I think it's smart. I think I mean, secure boot, the TPM is what changed everything in secure boot, and you could have that to secure run. You can make every application, like there's tons we could do with it. It does add some complexity and some management though.
But I do trust that hardware more than I trust some random
Yeah.
employee not getting bribed with $10,000 to
If
export a horror file.
like it's not exactly, it's not that hardware is not complete. Like, do you remember Andrew Bunny Huang hacking the Xbox when he basically the Xbox, it wasn't called a TPM at the time, but it had a like, yeah, it essentially was a trust, it was a security enclave in the Xbox and a chip. He had to use acids and stuff to remove the chips. He had to have a super expensive electron microscope, and then he had to, on tiny points, hook inputs and outputs up to a FPGA device just to be fast enough to process what he was looking at. But eventually, with a lot of deep, super expensive hardware hacking work, you can break into a secure chip and maybe get into an input or output that starts to give you these private keys. But I mean, listen to everything I just like. I don't even know how to use an electron microscope, let alone how are you going to solder a FGPA. So that's a very, to your point, it's a much bigger roadblock hacking that TPM than it, and by the way, this all requires physical access to the computer. So what's the victim going to think when you're in his computer pouring on acid, putting it under an electron microscope? And yeah, yes, I trust the hardware TPM more than a lot of things. We can agree.
Yeah. So this is good. Like the future is looking bright for session theft, at least, assuming this
Yeah,
does become a
I will
standard that
not read it.
others adopt. Yeah.
Unless
And
Mythos is so smart that it finds some sort of vulnerability, huge vulnerability in the interaction with the TPM.
there it is. There's the doom and gloom. I was worried we wouldn't get it. Thanks, Corey.
Had to deliver. It's kind of on brand.
The future is no longer bright. Unfortunately, the glass wings are going to shatter at some point.
Good thing I have iron legs.
Good thing you have iron legs. Hey everyone, thanks again for listening. As always, if you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. If you have any questions on today's topics, or if you have suggestions for future episode topics, please reach out to us on the social medias. We're both on Blue Sky. I'm at itsmark.me. Corey is at SecAdept. We're also on Instagram at watchguard_technologies. And I'm sure you can find our emails or probably our Reddit handles or anything else you want to out there on the internet, because everything has been stolen and breached and leaked at some point. Thanks again for listening, and you will hear from us next week.
What sucks when it comes to we're public personas at this point. There is no operational tradecraft security going on.
Yep, exactly. So talk to us, please, and thank you.
Yeah. Just don't send us more spam and scams. We get those on social media every single day.
Too late.